Hello and welcome back. I am Mr. Hoban, and today we're going to start talking about the Cold War conflict. Happened from roughly 1947 to 1991. Conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. This was a different kind of war. There was never any direct fighting between these two countries, and it starts really at the end of World War II. As that's coming to an end, tensions are increasing between the Soviet Union and the United States. What we're going to be looking at today are kind of like the setup, the introduction to the Cold War, beginning with the Yalta Conference. Then we'll be looking at what really came out of that conference and if there was anyone who was happy or upset or maybe disputed the end of it and didn't really like what came out of it. We're going to look at communism. That's going to be one of the root words we're going to talk about a lot. That how did communism lead to these conflicts? We're going to look at the arms and space races, respectively. We're going to talk about containment, which is something that will come up a lot, as well as the domino theory. And we'll wrap up talking about the Iron Curtain. So let's get started. As I mentioned, the Cold War began around 1947. However, before that time, in the 1945-ish area, there was a conference held. It was known as the Yalta Conference. And coming into this, the Soviet Union and the United States had two goals, really. For the Soviet Union, one of their main goals was security. They had been invaded twice by Germany in the last 30 years, so they wanted to keep Germany weak and they wanted to keep their borders secure. They wanted to punish Germany. That's something to keep in mind. They wanted to punish Germany and make them pay war reparations. They wanted to maintain control over countries between Germany and the USSR, again, creating a buffer zone. And they believed that communism was superior to capitalism and would replace it if it hadn't already been destroyed. What is communism, you ask? Communism is the economic system where all wealth and property are owned by the government. So the United States comes into Yalta with this goals as well. First, it wanted to promote economic growth and increase world trade across country borders. It wanted to promote democracy and free enterprise throughout the world. Believe a democratic government protected the rights of people, and free enterprise was, or capitalism was, the best form of the economy. And again, it's kind of countering this whole idea of communism. So at Yalta, the big three all get together in Europe in 1945. And the reason that they get together is to plan what post war Europe is going to look like. So, the first individual that I'm going to mention is Winston Churchill, and he is from Great Britain. Next in line is Franklin Delano Roosevelt from the United States. And finally, then there is Joseph Stalin from the USSR, or Soviet Union. So three things that really came out of this conference. First was this decision on Poland, where it was recognized, its government was recognized that it was set up by the Soviet Union. So the Soviets set up the Polish government, but there must be free elections in Poland for the government positions. Next is the Declaration of Liberated Europe. All people can choose the form of government under which they live. That's kind of a form of direct democracy when people have the say in order to see how their government's going to turn out and serve them. And finally, they had to make some decisions on Germany. It was split up into four zones, owned each zone. One zone was owned by Soviet Union, one by the United States, one by France, and one by Great Britain. And Berlin was divided. That's important. Berlin was divided. We'll come back to that a little bit later. Keep in mind, the Soviet Union was not happy at the end of this conference. He wanted war reparations from Germany. He wanted to punish Germany. They were not happy with the outcome of the Yalta Conference, and they would begin violating the parameters of this conference, which led to growing tensions over the next 44 years. And some of these growing tensions were also spurred on by the arms race. Whoever had the most advanced nuclear weapons would reign supreme militarily. And that's really what the arms race was, a buildup of nuclear weapons by the United States and the Soviet Union. And by the mid-1950s, both the US and the USSR had enough nuclear weapons to destroy Earth 1,000 times over. So that leads to increasing tensions. Another race that started to develop was the space race, race to space. The US and USSR constantly strove to gain an edge in the areas of science and technology. And whoever had the most sophisticated satellites surrounding the Earth would gain an advantage in spying and intelligence. And that was something both countries were trying to do to each other, spy and gain intelligence about the other. So some of the policies and beliefs of the United States during the Cold War we're going to cover right now. First was containment. And this is the belief that a policy of preventing the spread of communism around the world. The U.S. adopts this during the Cold War and has continued ever since. Between 1948 and 1952, the U.S. sent $13 billion in economic aid to war-torn Western Europe to try to help them rebuild their economies because communism thrives and is born from poverty. So helping the countries out to keep them from becoming communists is a perfect example of the containment policy, keeping it where it was, not allowing it to spread. And with the spirit of containment, or the idea of containment, came this speech from Winston Churchill. He was the Prime Minister of Great Britain. He cautioned the world about the threat of communist expansion, and he described the division between free Western Europe and communist Eastern Europe as an iron curtain that has descended across the continent from the Baltic to the Adriatic. And let me grab my pen here, a little bit of green, and this right here is the Iron Curtain he is referring to. That line there. On the western side, you have the Western Bloc, which you have the communist side, and Eastern Europe as the democratic side. Excuse me, free Western Europe and communist Eastern Europe. Got myself mixed up there. But that's all right. Just make sure we know the difference. And these countries here next to the Soviet Union, Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, along with Yugoslavia and Albania, they were all satellite nations that had all accepted this form of government which was communism and embraced those ideas. So the United States wanted to keep communism behind this Iron Curtain. The next thing that the U.S. was focusing on or came up with this idea of a domino theory, where the U.S. government believes that if one country in Asia falls to communism, its neighbors would all fall into communism like a row of dominoes. So if China falls, Korea, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and so on will fall as well. So that's something they're really worried about and afraid of during this time. What I wanted to wrap up with quickly was just looking at some of the presidents that served during the Cold War. We're going to touch on all of these individuals throughout our lessons. I just want to kind of highlight them now. First is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, serves from 1933 to 1945, only president to be elected more than 2 terms. He died in office of a brain aneurysm. Harry S. Truman served from 45 to 53. He's from Missouri, and there's a lot we'll talk about with him in the Cold War later on. Dwight D. Eisenhower, I like Ike, served from 1953 through 1961, was the famous World War II general. John F. Kennedy, he was a Democrat from Massachusetts, served from 1961 to 1963, met an untimely end when he was assassinated in November 1963, and we'll talk about what happened there as well. Lyndon Johnson took over for JFK and had the Great Society, served from 63 to 69. After him was Richard Milhous Nixon, first president to resign, and that had to revolve around something that was known as the Watergate scandals, and we'll talk about that. Jerry Ford, really all we're going to mention about him is that he pardoned Nixon. After that, Jimmy Carter, served from 1977 to 1981, served during the energy crisis, Camp David Accord, Iranian hostage crisis. We'll talk about those. Next is Ronald Reagan, known for Reaganomics. They're pretty familiar to something we've already talked about in one of these online lessons and a few units ago. So we'll get to that soon. And finally, we'll wrap up with George H.W. Bush, the father of George W. Bush. And he's around when the Berlin Wall falls, the Soviet Union collapses, and the first Gulf War. So that about wraps it up. Hope you've enjoyed. I'll see you next time. Have a good day.